Good morning. Thank you for being here. My name is Jose Garza, and I'm the Executive Director of Workers' Defense Action Fund. For over 5 years, Workers' Defense has been fighting side by side with our members to build a more inclusive democracy here in Texas. I'm also incredibly grateful to our allies at the Texas AFL-CIO, Common Cause Texas, Battleground Texas, the Texas Civil Rights Project, the Texas Democratic Party, and over 20 other organizations who are standing up to voter intimidation today. We are here to deliver a letter signed by over 30 organizations calling on Texas Senate Democrats to affirmatively block the confirmation of Secretary of State Whitley. And I'd like to read the array of organizations who have signed up to put their voice and their muscle and their power behind this effort. We are grateful for an incredibly diverse group of signers, including America's Voice, American Gateways. It's going to be a lot of page turning, so there's a lot of names. The Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, Battleground Texas Engagement Fund, Clean Elections Texas, Common Cause Texas, Common Ground for Texans, Deeds Not Words, Engage Texas, Fuerza del Valle, Grassroots Leadership, Hope Border Institute, Indivisible Austin, Indivisible Texas Ledge, Jolt and Jolt Initiative, Korean American Voters League, the League of United Latin American Citizens who are joining us today, the League of Women Voters of Texas who are also with us today, the Lubbock, Texas NAACP Charter 6198, Move Texas, Planned Parenthood Texas Votes, Progress Texas, who is joining us here today, Public Citizen, Raíces, the Texas AFL-CIO, Texas Civil Rights Project, Texas College Democrats, the Texas Democratic Party, the Texas Freedom Network that is also joining us today, Texas NAACP, Texas Organizing Project, the Texas Young Democrats who are with us today, United We Dream Texas, University Democrats, and as I mentioned, Workers' Defense Action Fund. We are here today because it is time. It is time that we recognize a long and ugly history of disenfranchisement and voter suppression in this state. It is an ugly history that is rooted in slavery and the poll tax, and it is a history that continues to rear its head today in voter ID laws, discriminatory redistricting plans, and a sustained attack on immigrant families that have been perpetuated by Governor Abbott himself. It is time that we call out that history and say enough is enough, because Texas voters have had enough. This past November, new members to the Texas Senate to stand up against the politics of division, against the politics of SB 4, against the politics of voter intimidation and voter suppression. That is what they expect. So when the sitting Texas Secretary of State targets naturalized citizens for disenfranchisement and falsely accuses them of committing voter fraud, well then it is time to act. Senate Democrats have the power right now to stand up to the politics of division. For them, the choice could not be more clear. They can choose to stand up to voter suppression, or they can choose to be complicit in Governor Abbott's divisive agenda. So we are here today because it is time. It is time for Senate Democrats to affirmatively act to block Secretary of State Whitley's confirmation. It is time for Senate Democrats to pick a side. If you please help me join Rick Levy, the president of the Texas AFL-CIO.
Thank you, Jose.
You bet.
Thank you, Jose, and thank all the groups for being here and standing together on this issue. I represent 240,000 of our affiliate members across the state. And the very core of the union movement is that every worker should have a voice. Every worker should have a voice on their job, and every worker should have a voice in their community. And what we do is we talk to our members about what's important to them, about what would make their life better, and then we ask them to get involved in their communities, and we ask them to get involved in the election process. Another thing we do is that we have a campaign to help permanent residents become citizens. There are 1.1 million people in this state today who are eligible to become citizens and fully participate in our communities. And what's particularly outrageous about this latest instance of voter suppression is that they target people who have taken that step to actually affirmatively say they want to be part of our communities and attempt to intimidate them from voting and attempt to intimidate them from taking their full place in this society, and that's just wrong. And so what we're doing is we're calling on all senators, particularly the Democratic senators, to stand up right now and to say enough is enough. Voter suppression is wrong, and if you've engaged in a scheme to suppress votes and you refuse to take responsibility for it, and you refuse to correct it, and you refuse to let every person who is on that list know that we want you to vote and we want you to participate, then we don't need you as our Secretary of State. So our voice and our voice of all our members around the state is lifted up today with these groups behind us to say, vote no on Secretary of State Whitley, and vote no on anybody that doesn't fully commit to making sure that every vote counts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Levy. If you could, please help me join Anthony Gutierrez, the Executive Director of Common Cause Texas.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Anthony Gutierrez. I'm the Executive Director of Common Cause Texas. Common Cause is a national, nonpartisan organization. We work on a pretty broad range of democracy reform issues. Here in Texas, we principally focus on voting rights and elections. During the election season, we work with several of our nonpartisan partners here on election protection, making sure that Texans are able to vote free from intimidation or vote suppression or simple confusion. During the session, we spend a lot of time in the House Elections Committee or the Senate State Affairs, just working on voting bills. One thing that we almost never do, and in fact we have never done in my time, in my years as executive director here, is weigh in on the nomination of a appointed official. But that is how just egregious, how outrageous it is. David Whitley's voter purge right now. This is just such an egregious act of vote suppression. We had to be here, we had to take a stand, and that is why we had to go testify against Secretary Whitley's nomination. Immediately when his advisory was sent out late on that Friday, there were a number of red flags and questions. In the week since then, we've seen multiple people testify. We've seen a couple days of hearings in San Antonio in the court trial. And we've heard a lot of words, but no satisfying answers to a long list of questions. And I think some of my colleagues here will touch on some of the questions that remain unanswered. For me, I want to highlight one of the biggest ones. And it's the one that Senator Royce West asked David Whitley directly during the confirmation hearing, which was a simple question to define what is voter suppression. David Whitley's response was, first, just panic, it seemed like, and then he said it was not relevant to his job. To his job as the chief election officer for the state of Texas, he didn't think it was relevant to just simply define voter suppression. Texans deserve a Secretary of State who understands our state's long, shameful history with vote suppression and understands that it's not just a relic of our past. It's a thing that happens today that needs to be fought against and combated. Texans deserve a Secretary of State who is going to actively make sure that voter suppression isn't a thing that happens anymore and works to make it a relic of the past. In short, Texans deserve much better than David Whitley. That's why we're standing here today with our friends, calling on all Texas senators to oppose Senator Whitley's nomination. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I am pleased to welcome the Executive Director of Battleground Texas, Oscar Silva. Go.
Buenos dias. Good morning, Texas. My name is Oscar Silva. I'm the Executive Director for Battleground Texas Engagement Fund. We work to build community power in marginalized communities across the state of Texas. But I'm a native Texan. I'm born and raised in El Paso to immigrant parents. My grandfather was a bracero who worked the crops and the fields in this country, leaving his family in Mexico for months out of the year, and then able to receive his permanent resident status because to him and to his family, it was worth it. My mother grew up recipient to this, and after she and my dad moved their little family, my sister and me, from Juarez to El Paso, my mother and my father worked hard at it and became naturalized citizens in the 90s because to them it was worth it. My sisters and I enjoyed growing up as U.S. citizens in Texas, now as young professionals who vote and actively participate in our communities, because to us, this is worth it. In fact, just last year, one of my eldest aunts, after living in Texas for decades as a permanent resident, she became a naturalized citizen, eager to participate in last year's elections because to her, it was worth it. And part of what makes the state Texas so worth it is the democracy that we get to participate in, we get to protect, and we get to defend. And one of the best ways in which we get to defend this is through our elected and appointed officials. David Whitley had at the very least one job: to protect and to defend the democracy of Texas. And at the absolute very least, to not attack it. David Whitley chose falsely to target Texans, and through this cowardly and irresponsible fear-mongering strategy has now put our democracy permanently at risk. And I urge you today, senators, who we have entrusted with protecting our rights and defending our democracy, to not brush over this and to block his confirmation to the office of the Texas Secretary of State. David Whitley has, at the very least, knowingly committed a moral crime against the state, against its people, and against our democracy. And I urge you today, as the head of an organization fueled by Texans and joined by dozens of other organizations alike, to not join Mr. Whitley in this moral crime and to block his confirmation to the office of the Texas Secretary of State. Gracias.
Thank you, Oscar. If you would, Mimi Marziani, the Executive Director of the Texas Civil Rights Project.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Mimi Marziani. I'm the President of the Texas Civil Rights Project. As many of you know, TCRP provides Texas lawyers for Texas communities in service of the greater movement for equality and justice in our state. I'm here today to make 2 points, some of which have been touched on by my colleagues. Number one, this is an unprecedented opposition to a Secretary of State nomination. Like Common Cause, like the League of Voters, like many other organizations who have signed on to that letter, the Texas Civil Rights Project has never before taken a stance on this issue. The reason we felt compelled to speak up now is because we know how important the Secretary of State's work is. Through our work on the Texas Election Protection Coalition, for instance, our lawyers work directly with the Secretary of State's office to make sure that every eligible voter can cast a ballot that counts. This requires, at the top of that organization, somebody who is competent, somebody who is even-handed, somebody who is paying attention to the details of what they are doing. Very unfortunately, David Whitley has already proved that he is none of those things, and for those reasons, he should not be confirmed. Second point is that this is an issue that should concern all Texans. Again, this is an important office. This is the office that oversees the mechanisms of our elections. If the mechanisms of our elections do not work, our democracy does not work. If our democracy does not work, our elected officials are not going to be accountable to us, the people of Texas. They are going to be accountable to special interests. And so I ask you, all of you watching this, reading about this, to think to yourself, why do you vote? Why do you care about Texas? And to recognize just how important this position is and to stand up alongside us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. Finally, we are joined by Manny Garcia, the Executive Director of the Texas Democratic Party.
Thank you. My name is Manny Garcia. I'm the very proud Executive Director of the Texas Democratic Party. I wish we would be standing here today with all of Texas's leadership, Republican, Democratic, and progressive partners alike, celebrating voting rights victories, talking about automatic online or same-day voter registration, ending racial and partisan gerrymandering, modernizing our elections infrastructure, or expanding voting hours and getting a voting holiday. Instead, we are here again to defend the voting rights of Texans from attacks from their very own government. David Whitley's nomination to the Texas Secretary of State was a slap in the face to Texas voters. Whitley's voter purge attempts are nothing more than state-sponsored voter suppression by this Republican government, and there must be accountability for that. We call on our Texas senators to honor the rich voting rights history of the party of LBJ. We thank them for thoroughly investigating this attack on voters and attempting to get to the bottom of this. And we hope that they continue their efforts to expand our democracy and focus on making it easier for Texans to vote, not harder. But every day that David Whitley sits in the Secretary of State's office is a threat to our democracy. Texas senators should vote no.
Thank you very much. We are available for pull-aside interviews, all of the speakers and signers. Thank you very much for coming out and being here with us today. Thank you, guys.